Notebook on Cities and Culture's Korea Tour is brought to you by Daniel Murphy, David Hayes, and Polar Inertia Journal, an outlet for artists and researchers documenting the urban condition at polarinertia.com. So we both come from America. You've lived in a few countries before you came to South Korea for this stretch. You've lived in Colombia, you've lived in Germany. And this is something I was thinking recently. Many things divide us Americans, but one thing unites us. The fact that it's psychologically unacceptable to throw our used toilet paper in that wastebasket. Do you think so?
That's right. I gotta tell you, man, you've done your research. Yeah, when I lived in Colombia, we could not flush our toilet paper. And if memory serves me correctly, that's the only place I've ever been where that was the case. I've heard that it exists other places.
Sometimes here they say on bathroom walls, is usually in Korean only, don't flush your toilet paper, or don't put paper of any kind in the toilet. And when you're an American, you first see that sign, you assume, okay, that can't mean put your used toilet paper somewhere other, like in that wastebasket. Like, you just assume that's not what it means right at first, because it's so unacceptable.
That's really interesting you say that. And that's one of the things that I love about Korea, is that even though I've lived here for almost a year, and then 2 years ago I lived here for about a year as well, there are those things that unless someone tells you, or unless you particularly pay attention, it's like every day there's something cool that you learn about the culture. I've actually passed level 2 out of 6 levels at a university for speaking, reading, and writing Korean, and yet I've never noticed that in a bathroom. So, like, it's one of the problems with the Korean language, is that, like, you learn all these things and you feel like, oh, I can make simple sentences, but unless you learn a specific verb or a specific vocabulary word, you have no idea what it means. So there's a surprise that awaits me the next time I go to the bathroom.
So when you saw the wastebasket that looked like the ones you saw in Colombia, your mind edited that out?
Yeah, I thought that it was just because in Colombia, when there's a wastebasket, it's never empty. Like, you know what that wastebasket is for, but, like, in Korea,
you hope for a lid. Best case scenario, there's a lid.
I might have lived in a different, the lidless part of Colombia on the coast. Yeah.
Oh, it is Notebook on Cities and Culture. I'm Colin Marshall, coming to you from the land of mostly flushable toilet paper, South Korea, specifically Seoul, specifically the neighborhood of Hongdae, where I'm speaking to Chance Dorland. He is a journalist here, an American journalist living in South Korea. He is heard on TBS EFM. He's been heard on a variety of podcasts. Right now, the Groovecast, the official podcast of Groove Magazine, an English language magazine here in Seoul. But he's done Chance Dorland's Peace Corps podcast. He's done the immortal Chance and Dan Do Korea, which I heard a lot of when I was really gearing myself up to come to South Korea. What was your relationship with Korea at the time of Chance and Dan Do Korea?
Whoa, I felt like you read my autobiography. This isn't crazy. So yeah, I did that 3 years ago, and that was back when I was doing some part-time work for Arirang Radio.
Another English language station.
Yeah, there's a couple here in Seoul that are not specifically for learning English, and they're more culture or news. And Arirang is kind of more the culture front of radio. And so I was doing a show there once a week while I was also teaching English at a private academy here. And a friend of mine, I did some improv when I lived in Germany. And when I came to Korea, I was like, I got a lot of free time living as an expat. I'll start doing some improv. And I met this guy named Dan at just this sort of like open workshop thing in Itaewon. And we just hit it off. And then he ended up living really far from where I lived. And so we actually didn't see each other in person, aside from a handful of times over the next year. But yeah, we did this podcast that I recorded on Pro Tools on my computer, and he was on Skype, and it was a lot of fun. And it's
talking life in Korea.
Yeah, I don't want to say it's embarrassing, because like I hate when people like talk back the things they say. Like I don't think there's anything in that podcast that I would say that I'd be embarrassed about, but listening to it now, like, it was raunchy. Like, we were just like throwing out our ideas about Korea. I remember we talked about how, like, if you move to Korea, like, date a Korean guy, because, like, you'll learn so much more about the culture. And
That's true.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was in Germany, I didn't date a German, and it was probably one of my biggest mistakes that I made.
You have to be into Germans.
Well, I love German people. Like, it's weird. When I tell Germans that I meet here in Seoul, and I meet quite a few Germans here living here in Seoul, I say, I lived in Berlin for about a year, and, but I lived here in Seoul, and they're like, oh, did you not like Germany? I'm like, no, I love Germany. Germany was great. I just feel really comfortable here in Seoul for one reason or another, but German people themselves such a solid group. So it wasn't any lack of interest in Germans or German females.
Sure.
But yeah, Chance and Dan do Korea. I guess that was the reason we enjoyed doing it so much, was that we really just, we were discovering about all these different things that you're doing while you're here. Just the food, obviously, and then the culture, and trying to understand the language and things. And this was this great outlet. And my friend Dan is one of these guys who has really picked up a skill as an expat. Anyone who's lived abroad, you should know, hopefully this happened to you, is that you just have so much of this time that in America or your home country, you probably just would have spent, watching TV.
Sticking around.
Yeah, talking to your family on Skype, or if you live near your family, talking to them. And there's nothing wrong with talking to your family, but you don't have that here. So anytime you live abroad, play guitar, do improv, do stand-up comedy.
Your time is your own.
Yeah, and Dan, this guy, I don't know exactly what he, if he did stand-up in college or something, but he was definitely not a stand-up comedian when he came to Korea. And actually, I'm going to interview him for the Groovecast here in about a month. He started his own sort of not comedy festival, but it's like a one night, 10 comedians, and then the winner gets a couple $100. And he's been doing comedy for 3 or 4 years, and he's well known here, and that wouldn't happen back in the States. And that's one of the reasons why I love living abroad, is because not only do you learn about another culture, but you really can invest in yourself in ways you never would have thought possible.
In the days of Chance and Dan do Korea, did you already have ideas that you would come back here to live long term? Were you thinking of a Korean future for yourself?
Talking about regrets, when I say regret, I didn't date a German girl when I lived in Berlin. I regret that I left Korea, but I think I kind of had to leave Korea.
Why did you leave Korea?
I joined the Peace Corps. And unfortunately, the Peace Corps was maybe one of the worst choices I ever made in my life. I don't recommend serving with the Peace Corps.
Interesting. The Peace Corps, I was talking a little while ago to, I don't know if you know the writer Peter Hessler, but he's one of the more famous Peace Corps. He's a famous Peace Corps alumnus, I guess, but he's also a writer mostly about China, most famously about China for The New Yorker, but now he's in Egypt, I think. And he was saying when he got let out of the Peace Corps, in the sort of debriefing they do, they all said, the higher-ups said, now, when you get out of the Peace Corps and you're applying for jobs, people are going to ask you, wait, what's the Peace Corps? Or, I didn't think they still had that. Is that something you also met with after your Peace Corps experience? People didn't even know what it was?
Yeah, I didn't write these numbers down, so I can't speak with certainty, but I feel like when I meet a lot of Americans, I used to assume that they would know what the Peace Corps was, and then a lot of people don't.
They know the words sometimes.
Yeah, they recognize the word, and then it was kind of disappointing because I'd meet a lot of foreigners, and especially Europeans, and I would just assume they wouldn't know what the Peace Corps was, and they'd be like, oh yeah, I know what the Peace Corps is.
Why did they know the Peace Corps?
I'm sorry to say it, but I feel like a lot of Europeans' general intelligence level is a lot higher than some Americans.
We can say awareness level, probably.
Awareness level, sure. I like this. You're a man who makes friends. I make enemies. But yeah, so I tell people I served in the Peace Corps. I lived in Colombia, and it was not a great experience for a lot of different reasons.
Why did you know about the Peace Corps well enough to join it?
Well, so I knew about the Peace Corps just because I had known just in general, what opportunities there were for volunteering abroad. Right. After I lived in Germany, I went back to the United States, and unfortunately, because, I had this grand scheme in my mind, going to LA or going to New York and doing radio. I'm more of a talk radio guy as opposed to straight journalism. Right. And after I was in Berlin, I went straight to LA, and it just was not what I wanted it to be. Then I moved to New York, and it was definitely not what I wanted it to be.
So both major American cities, nope.
No, after Germany, no, because, I had a lot of bad times in Germany just because it was my first experience abroad. Right. And, I'm not good at languages. There are certain things people are good at, and languages is not one of them for me.
Any language?
English is a solid first choice. But, there are just people that are good at things, and I'm not good at learning languages. And unfortunately, I've chosen quite a lifestyle for that to be the case. So when I got to Germany, it was really hard. Just depression, not being able to describe things. And, I like telling jokes, and I like conversation, and anyone that's learned a foreign language, those are not things that come easy.
Jokes are usually lost.
Yeah, but oh man, when I could make jokes, my guest family would just erupt in laughter. When I could get it down, it was magic. And so that was really hard for me. And despite the greatness of living in Germany, wonderful, caring people, great culture, I love Berlin. It was hard. It was really hard. But as I think maybe with a lot of things in life, and this is probably a good thing, you don't remember a lot of the bad times. Yes. And so I have very fond memories of Germany, but I remember that there were some difficult times. And then, when I went back to the United States, couldn't wipe it off my plate, you know? I couldn't start over, and I'd kind of realized...
Berlinified in some way?
Berlinified, but I never wanted to go back to Germany. I wanted to live other places. Berlin just showed me how great a foreign culture could be.
You got a taste of foreignness, and then you had to have more of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm from a 1,000-person town in Iowa, and... You know, nothing against my town. There's some great people in my town, and I gotta tell you, there's some a-holes in my town, too.
And you know all of them.
I knew everybody, but, you know, my town, I had great friends, and then there are some people that maybe I wish I didn't know. But overall, I've made peace with growing up in a small Iowa town, and I try to go back as much as I can, and I have some friends for life in that wonderful little town. But, you know, you don't learn about going abroad in small town Iowa.
Yeah, it's... You know, the small town in Iowa is a big component of most of the bios of you I've seen online. It starts off always saying that you come from a small town in Iowa. And it's one of those things that's easily caricatured, I guess. Iowa is just, for those unfamiliar with America, Iowa is a state we usually think of as having mostly small towns, maybe only small towns, and it's sort of remote from the major cities of the country. And I remember somebody who grew up in Iowa City telling me he looked up Iowa on Urban Dictionary. I don't know why. But the first definition a user of Urban Dictionary had submitted for Iowa was the best state in the union, maybe the best place in the world. We have the best chicks, the best county fairs, and the best mudding, which I had to look up mudding. Mudding. What's mudding?
Mudding. So my dad is not a librarian, but he worked at a library, you know, basically my entire life. And so I did not have mudding experiences. I didn't grow up on a farm, but I believe, for what I've been heard from friends and people, mudding is when you just go out. You know, the ground is wet with like a four-wheeler or some other, you know, vehicle of that type, and you just let loose. And
let the mud fly.
Yeah. And you can tell when someone's gone mudding because there's a difference between like, oh, it rained last night, there's some dirt on the truck, and like, is that a truck?
Yes.
Covered in dirt?
Like it's mostly a hill of mud.
Exactly. So that's really funny is that I still, you know, like I said, a lot of the times you don't remember the bad. I still have some very, very positive, great memories of Iowa, and I think it's a great place to raise a family, and especially now Des Moines is becoming such a cool place. But, yeah, I remember seeing people that were mudding and not wanting to ever do that.
You didn't want that life.
Yeah, so that I grew up in Iowa, but I didn't have that life. I didn't grow up on a farm. I grew up in, you know, truthfully, I lived in a trailer court. My family didn't have a lot of money. And so I lived in like the bad part of town, but like, you know, all the kids in my family were smart, and like we had lots of friends, and the town sort of like adopted us. We didn't come from a great family. So yeah, I grew up in Iowa, but I feel like even though I grew up in Iowa, it's really foreign to me because I don't know anything about farming.
It is an agricultural state. But the friend who grew up in Iowa City who was telling me about this definition of Iowa he read was saying, you know, you see that. You see a guy who's written, we have the best chicks, we have the best...
Iowa girls are beautiful.
Well, I've never been to Iowa, so bear that in mind. But this guy who says, we have the best chicks in Iowa, we have the best county fairs, we have the best mudding, that indicates right there that they've never been anywhere else. Like,
yeah, absolutely. And despite the fact that I, like, every time I talk about Iowa, I talk about the good and I talk about the bad, because I don't want to lie. Iowa is a great place, and I don't know if defend is the right word, but I try to defend Iowa as much as I can. It's not your fault if you grow up in a small area or small town area and you don't go other places. There's nothing wrong with that, but it is limiting. Just like, you know, there's nothing wrong with a lot of choices we make in life, but once you set down your flag in a certain, you know, progressive motion, you limit yourself. And I felt very limited growing up that way. And I think that a lot of people would enjoy living in a lot of other places or doing a lot of different things, but it's not the culture where I come from, you know?
Right. I mean, how many people did you know who had traveled abroad? I mean, did you encounter many when you were growing up? Was it just a few? Was it, you know, here and there you'd meet somebody who'd been, I don't know about to Asia, but, you know, to Europe or where have you?
So, two things. I'll get back to this, who I met that went abroad, because that's a huge part of my life, but I just want to focus on people that traveled. I remember how big of a deal it was just to meet someone who had been to New York, or meet someone who'd been to LA, let alone someone who actually, like, lived in New York. I remember growing up, like, at one point in high school, I met, like, a British guy. He was, like, you know, a peer of mine, like, you know, same age or something, and I just wanted to hear him talk.
Very exotic.
Yeah, I just remembered, like, if he was in the room talking, I felt better.
Oh, really?
Like, it was like, that is awesome. And, like,
You had more of a perspective on the world if there was just him in the room speaking differently than other people.
but it wasn't even about perspective, because, like, it's like, if you don't know a language and someone speaks it to you, you don't know what they're saying. So, like, I didn't even think about asking him about England. I just wanted to hear him read a list of groceries that he wanted to buy with his accent.
basic, yes.
That's all I wanted, because, like, that was amazing. And so that's what I grew up in, where, like, me just meeting someone from England didn't care what he had to say. I just wanted to hear him talk. That's what I was growing up. And then I had this other thing where, you know, as I mentioned, it didn't come from the most well put together family, but I was sort of, I don't know if adopted is the correct term, but I have these people that I lovingly call my fake family. And so my really good friend Tristan, growing up, his parents, Karen and Doug, kind of took care of me, and they worked for publications. They were writers, and they worked with photographers and things like that, and they would just travel all over the world, mostly to Europe, but, you know, they've been all over the place.
But they chose to be in the center of the United States.
They chose to live in Iowa. My friend's dad, Tristan's dad, he grew up in New Jersey, and my friend's mom, she grew up in Iowa, but they could have gone anywhere. But, you know, they lived on a small farm outside of my town, and just beautiful. Like garden is a cheap way to describe what they had at their house. Like, their house was just amazing. You know, you just walk around and want to take pictures. And they, without me asking, because once again, I didn't think, like, hey, what's France like? I didn't ask them those questions.
Yeah, I remember having the same memories of, like, growing up under different circumstances, but there was a time when somebody would have come back from a foreign country and I wouldn't have asked anything about it. And I don't know why now, because that's the first thing I do. Even if I've been to the country, I ask them what their experience was. As a kid, somehow, I don't know. It doesn't occur to you. I don't know.
Yeah, well, for me particularly, without having someone, like, sit me down and tell me this directly, it was because I knew without a doubt that America was the best country in the world.
Yes.
I've since, you know, opened my mind a little bit, but because of that, like, I didn't care what was going on in other places.
That's not America. That's probably, you just envision some third world dump if it's not America, right?
And if it's not America, it's not America, but it's not a third world dump, it's just not as good. Like, France, like, maybe it looks cool, but they're not as free as we are.
Right.
It's kind of an overused term now, and I hate to say that because, like, everybody's like, freedom this and, like, America. But, like, really growing up, like, I knew that we were freer than other people.
Which meant what to you?
I still don't know what that means.
You knew the phrase, we are freer than other people.
I just knew we were, but I didn't know what that meant.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I had my friend Tristan's parents, and so I grew up talking to them, and, like, them kind of nurturing me and just, like, helping me with, like, growing up Dorland. And they
Reality show coming soon.
and I just knew that, you know, they did it, and so I knew it probably was a cool thing to do, because, you know...
It just takes one example, really.
Yeah, no, it just takes one example, and if I didn't have them, I don't know where I'd be right now. Like, I know people are always like, you know...
Mudding, probably.
Yeah, I'd be mudding. Finally, I would have quite a truck. But yeah, you know, in life, I think the older you get, you maybe can realize these things more. It's hard to ask this of, like, a 15-year-old, but everybody probably has, like, you know, if I didn't know this person, didn't know that person... If I didn't know my friend Tristan's parents, it's hard to say where I'd be right now. I don't want to think about where I'd be right now.
Right. How did you first go abroad? How and when did you first go abroad?
So, with a name like Chance, it's kind of hard to use the word chance. I always feel a little strange saying my name without talking about myself, but random chance. When I went to Emerson College in Boston. I had a great experience at Emerson. At school's ridiculously expensive, but I got a great education. I loved my classmates. I had great relationships with my professors.
You must have written a good personal essay, because it's hard. That's a college that's hard to get into, even if you come from a more stable family than you described coming from.
Yeah, actually, I've thought about that a few times. I'm not quite sure how I got into Emerson. I worked for a radio station my senior year of high school, and so I had air checks. That was nice. And I worked for the NBC affiliate in Des Moines, WHO TV 13, so I was running camera for newscasts. So I had that on my resume, so maybe that had to do with it. But, like, yeah, I don't know how I got into Emerson College, but I got in there and I got some crazy loans. Lower your price, Emerson. But aside from that, wonderful school. I had such a great time there. I would love to be able to maybe teach something at some time in Emerson College. I love that school to death. And I got there, and when I was there, despite having such a great time and getting involved with radio, and I did some TV when I was there, I got bored. I have ADD, and I didn't take medication growing up. Because to be able to take medication, your parents have to take you to a doctor.
Sure.
Didn't happen quite often, but when I got into college, I couldn't sit through classes. Like, I didn't know how to sit still for 2 hours. And that's, like, thinking back, like, that's scary. Like, I'm surprised I was able to get up in the morning.
Right. But you don't have to go. On the plus side in college, you can study.
Well, maybe if you go to a fine institution like the University of Iowa. I love Iowa City. I thought about maybe going to the University of Iowa, but I needed to get out of Iowa for a while. You have giant classes there. Emerson, you got like 15, 20, 25 kids in your class.
That empty seat.
Yeah. So I did not miss class. But I got bored there. And when I first moved to Boston's kind of a scary city coming from Iowa. There's homeless people.
Right. What were your first impressions of Boston coming from Iowa?
When I first got there, like, it was like, just, oh my God, this is amazing. But then, like, as I mentioned, homeless people, like, that was so sad to me. It was so sad to see people, like, on the street. And, like, I don't mean to say, like, I'm a saint. I didn't, like, give them money, and I didn't, like, be like, how can I help you? But I was just so sad to be like, oh my God, there are people, like, lying down on the street. And
the very notion of it.
Yeah, just the very notion of it, you know? And then, just, like, riding public transportation was, like, a little scary, things like that. And after, like, a year, like, whatever, I stopped looking at the homeless people, didn't make eye contact with people on the T, things like that. It's sort of...
You got Bostonized. You turned Bostonian. When did you realize Boston isn't even that big of a city?
No, and actually, and that's the thing, is that, like, I got bored. Oh, yeah. Boston, you can walk it, you know, your feet will hurt afterwards, but, you know, sit down, have a meal, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
So...
You can't walk across Seoul.
Yeah, no, I would never try. Yeah, you can't even bike across Seoul half the time.
Yeah, there's the river bike path, which is cool.
Oh,
but
it's wonderful.
It takes a long time to get across that thing.
Yeah. And so Boston, small city, and I'd finished, I was working on my third year of school, and I was just like, you know what? I moved to Boston, and, I felt like growing up, I left my small city, and I was working in Des Moines. I went to high school in Des Moines, half a day my senior year, went to, like, a radio film program, and it was kind of like I was pushing the envelope in my own way, and it was like, Boston, it's cool, but I want to do something else. And I didn't want to move to LA, I didn't want to move to New York, because obviously I would have to, like, quit school or transfer or something, and I liked Emerson a lot. So I applied for a government scholarship to the Congress Bundestag Youth Exchange for young professionals, and they do high school, young professional, which is like around college, a little bit after college time. Do you want me to redo that part? Around college time. And I found this fellowship to go live in Germany for a year and take classes at a German college and German university.
What did you know about Germany at that time?
I didn't know anything.
Oh,
and I'm slightly embarrassed to say, but the reason that I really wanted to do this was that I loved World War II. I grew up playing World War II video games.
Wolfenstein 3D, what have you?
Yeah, Day of Defeat was a mod for Half-Life. This was before, like, other stuff, like Call of Duty and all that crap. That didn't exist, man. I was dial-up modem.
I think I gave away my age by using Wolfenstein 3D as an example. Yeah. But anyway, maybe a bit after that, you were playing these games, you were into World War II history?
That was pixelized back in the day. Yeah. Wolfenstein was not smooth. And I was, like, reading, like the Band of Brothers books. Ambrose, I think, wrote those, right? And, I was reading all these things, and it was just so romanticized, and I was like, wow, that must have been so awesome to, like, shoot people. I was so wrong, but, like, I didn't know. Whatever, I just read books, and, like, Band of Brothers came out when I was in high school-ish, so I was like, this is awesome. I want to go to Germany. And then, once again, completely blew my mind. I got it. And, I got sent to Germany, and I lived in Cologne for 3 months, and then I got sent to Berlin for 9 months, and almost immediately when I got there, I had to shred this, like, old this self-induced image of Germany, because once I got there, I just realized how sad World War II was. And if anything...
You can still see, like, you go to London, in some parts of that place, it still feels like it's World War II even there. But in Berlin, that's got to be intensified.
Yeah, I mean, before I even got to Berlin, this feeling happened. But, to speak of Berlin, there are still... I remember I was walking around with my guest father. Great guy. I wish I would have kept up with him. I really should have such a great family. And we'd gone to, like, a soccer game or something, and we were coming back on the German S-Bahn, I think, and the above-ground train, and I was like, what is that in the bridge? And he's like, oh, that's a bullet hole.
Right.
And I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, we didn't fix all the bullet holes for a reason. Like, we like them that they're there so we can remember what happened. And at first I thought that was kind of stupid, but then immediately I was like, no, actually, that's a really cool thing. I'm down with that.
Nothing has bullet holes in America.
Well,
Unless they were just made. You know what I mean?
part of LA do you live in?
I live in Koreatown, which, I mean, had some bullet holes in 1992, but they fixed them.
Sure. No, look. Oh, so I get what you're saying. Yeah. In America, we don't put up with that crap.
We have guns,
fix
of
it.
course. We have many guns, more guns than people. But when something gets shot, we replace
We
it.
fix it. So, you know, that was why, even though I didn't really have a good reason to go to Germany, everybody else that I knew in my program, there's 75 of us in our age group. And they're Germanic language majors, minors, people that had like grew up in Germany at some point. Like I knew no German. It was me and like a cook and a couple other people in the program who had like no German at all. And we had no reason to be there. But what a great experience. And like I said, there were some lows. I hit some depression in Germany just because I couldn't talk to people. But really,
Part of the reason you go, though, is to get the lows. You wouldn't have really had you wouldn't have had as rich lows staying home, wherever home is.
well, yeah, okay, rich lows.
Yes.
I would have had lows probably staying in the United
you have
States.
lows anywhere.
But rich lows. Like what a way to, if you're gonna like break your leg, like fall off a mountain. Like what have a story.
Don't do it mudding.
Yeah, don't do it mudding because you're like, I fell off the four-wheeler again. Chance, gosh dang it. So, yeah, I had such a wonderful time, and I just learned so much, and, I don't even like talking about World War II anymore. Like, I've realized, like, what happened. Like, yeah, I knew what happened, but, like, I've realized what happened, and I don't hold, grudges. And when people say things about Germany, like, I'm a big fan of freedom of speech. Like, you say what you want to do, and I'll support you for saying it. You might be an idiot, but, like, go ahead and say it. But, like, I really take a little bit of offense when people put down Germany and such a warm, caring people. My guest family used to make fun of me because Americans didn't care about poor people. They'd be like, if you're poor in America, you could die of cancer. Here in Germany, you're not going to die of cancer. Or you might, but because they treated it and it didn't work out, you're not going to die because you don't have any medicine. And I was like, come on, guest family, like, pull it back a little bit. And then after a while, I started agreeing with them,
The nuance they might not have realized is that in America, the very poor have better health care effectively than the lower middle class. The very poor can get more, just based on the structure of things in the U.S. and how the government allots resources than people who make some money, a little bit of money, which is in a way a worse situation.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And I know with everything with the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, that's changed, and we're making some progress. But that's a decent point. I grew up poor. We weren't poorest of the poor. It's not like I was a really fat kid, so it's not like we didn't have food. So, but there's...
In America, the poor people are fatter, though, so that's another thing.
Yeah, well, that's a decent point. But had I eaten only the healthiest of healthy dinners, I still probably would have been overweight as a child. So, we
pure quantity issue.
Yeah, we weren't aching for food. But, we didn't have any money, and, there's worse things than growing up poor. It's growing up cheap. Yes. And my family was cheap and poor, and that's a
deadly combo.
That's a mix. And so I've been the recipient of I got free lunch going to school, and I got federal loans and forgiveness of things when I went to college, and so I've been the recipient of some things. But I tell people all the time I would rather grow up poor in Germany than middle class in America any day. Poor in Germany is a much better lifestyle. Now if you're gonna be super rich, go ahead and live in America. Super rich in America, that's a good time.
Place to be.
That is the place to be. And so, just to wrap up my German experience, I learned all these things. And then, when I went back to America, LA wasn't doing it for me. And I did not have a good time in New York at all. And I just, I got addicted to living abroad. But I didn't want to go back to Germany. I wanted to go other places, and I didn't know where I wanted to go. So... that's why, unfortunately, my whole goal of going and doing radio in LA or something, it didn't work out.
Yeah, it's fascinating that with Los Angeles and New York, the two biggest American cities, in a way, sort of the cultural capitals of each coast, I guess in every way, they're not cities you can sort of just go to. I mean, Berlin, I feel like people often go and they have a good experience almost no matter what they do. Seoul, people can sort of fall into it. But you really have to work hard to find an approach to a Los Angeles or a New York, don't you? It's like they're not user-friendly.
That's absolutely true. You're just talking, before we got the interview started, you have this uncanny way of just being able to put logical ideas into words, but like they're not logical until someone actually says them.
And sometimes I don't understand what I say until I say it. Same with anybody else, I think.
You're absolutely right. If you go to Berlin and you don't have an enjoyable time, something's wrong with you. If you come to Seoul,
Berlin.
Yeah, it's not Berlin's fault. And if you come to Seoul and you don't have a good time, I know people that don't like Seoul and they're good people and they just don't like Korean food. They just don't find it good, but that's
always too crowded.
That's not Seoul's fault.
Right.
If you come to Seoul and you don't have a good time, you got to reevaluate your priorities in life.
Yeah, it might be you.
But if you go to LA and you don't have a good time, even though I'm not a huge fan of LA, I can understand why. You go to New York and you don't have a good time, I'm like, yes, overrated city. But at the same time, I understand LA or New York can be a great place for some people.
Yeah.
But it's different. It's a different feel.
Yeah, there's no. At least for Los Angeles, I spend so much time talking about it, thinking about it, living in it, that I feel like it's impossible to say that I like it and impossible to say that I dislike it. And I'd probably feel the same about New York. These cities put you in the position of, you're just sort of grappling with them. And it's enjoyable sometimes, it's less enjoyable others, but you're sort of you're locked into a kind of chess game with these cities, whereas it's more accommodating in Berlin or in Seoul. They kind of accommodate you, whereas American cities, they don't really roll anything out for you. You've got to, figure it out.
To piggyback on what you just said, I don't have to deal with anything in Seoul. Yeah. It's like if I live in Seoul, I don't have to be like, man, I love Korea. I love Korean food. I just love the culture here, but boy, do I hate kimchi. No, I got nothing that's poking me in the back. But you live in New York, it's it's crazy expensive. It's dirty a lot of the times. There's a lot of things that are going on in New York. LA, there's a lot of things going on in LA. Even if you like it, if you're a decent person, you should be easily able to come up with a few things you don't like.
Yeah.
I don't got that about this place, and that's why I love Korea.
So when did Korea enter the picture for you? When did you become aware of Korea as a possible place to be?
So once again, blind luck. I guess I should say blind luck instead of random chance, because as it's my name. But yeah, after I went into LA and New York and I didn't really enjoy it, I was really at a crossroads in my life, and I was just like, what the hell am I going to do? I wasn't ready to I wasn't going to give up, radio, because radio is just I love radio. That's what I want to do. And I didn't know what to do, but I was like, all right, I haven't lived in Iowa for a while, and I don't have to live at home anymore. I'm my own person. I can live by myself. So I was like, well, let's figure it out. So I still wanted to do radio, but after interning in LA and New York for radio and television entities, it was just I didn't want to have to put in 10 years before I could do anything.
Yes.
And it's unfortunate. Radio and media in the United States, unless you just get a crazy, crazy, crazy lucky break, you're not going to have a talk show at 22 years old. You're not going to be the host of a television show at 22 years old, at least the type of television show that I'd want to do.
Yeah.
And so it was I don't want to put in my time because it's not worth it to me. So I looked at second cities, moving to an Orlando or a Seattle or something like that, and it was nah, I'm going to have to put in my time there, too.
Yeah, they have their local scenes and such, but it's interesting that somebody the generation above us who had these same goals, that would be their path, to go to a second city, third city, fourth city, work their way up there, put in their time and rise through the ranks. But as you and I well know, of course, now you can easily host a show at 22 on the web, which is where it's almost not a second-class thing, because most of the media I consume is made by people on the web. It's not major television shows, and it's not major radio shows. It's podcasts, it's videos.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point to bring up. I know people probably have these wishes that come up every once in a while, but I wish I could go to school now. I wish I could go back to Emerson and start my career now, because when I was at Emerson, I started an online talk radio station because WRS, which is our great, Emerson radio station, it's an FM signal, and it was really valuable, and they didn't want to have a talk show on it. So everybody there liked me, and they trusted me, and things were like, yeah, we're not going to give you a talk show chance. So I started something called ETIN, the Emerson Talk and Information Network, and it still exists. It's had its ups and downs, because I was the guy when I was there. I didn't have friends. I was just running ETIN the whole time. We had 100 kids involved, and it was fine. I was enjoying doing that. But there weren't crazy people like me afterwards, so it's kind of just gone back to its normal stuff. But when I was there, it was kicking. Everybody was doing shows. But the thing was, I had to write XML code.
Oh, sure.
There wasn't just all these free websites. I remember thinking at the time, I was YouTubing when I was a freshman in college, YouTube for audio. What's the YouTube website where you can just upload as many audio podcasts as you want, and it just didn't exist. They had all
SoundCloud now, but...
Yeah, SoundCloud, but back in the day, like, even SoundCloud was not what it is now. It wasn't accepted, and, like, everything cost money, and, like, it wasn't good. There wasn't, like, a one and done format, like, this is the website. And so I remember thinking if I had money back in the day, I could be a bazillionaire now, and I could have created this audio website. Right. But be that as it may, you're absolutely right. Nowadays, like, being on the internet is not second class at all, but I would argue it is second class when it comes to revenue. And that's the problem, is that the revenue has not caught up with the innovative hosts and the innovative programming, the innovative concepts. It's still do it on your own, you know, and then fight for scraps of food here and there, and hopefully that'll change.
It's true, but as with the mainstream media, revenue's going down, and chances of getting into it are also going down. So they're kind of meeting. As one slowly goes up, the other slowly goes down. I mean, there will come a time when they're about even, then.
Yeah, and it's happening, like, you know, back in the day, if you watched Channel 13, the NBC affiliate that I worked for when I was in high school, you watched it with an antenna, and then they had the HD antenna, and then now most people I know that watch TV, they have it come through their cable or their satellite. Right. And once it's all coming through your cable and your satellite, it's also coming through your computer, and there's not as big of a difference between, well, this guy puts his stuff up and he records it on location or at his home, and then someone else puts it up from a studio located in downtown Des Moines. What's the difference? But yeah, even though a guy who would love for it to be equal, it's still not equal. It's going to take some time, you know. I think by the time I die, if I'm lucky and I live till I'm like 80, it'll be much, much better, and like it'll just be awesome for everybody that's on the internet. But we haven't quite made it there.
The internet may take a different form at that time. Who knows? But you know, before that era comes, I mean, in the present, when you got to Korea, how soon were you thinking of like sort of making media projects related to Korea?
Yeah, so you know, I came to Korea because I taught English, and I hate teaching English now. I'm not an English teacher, and, you know, I'm not religious, but God bless anybody who wants to go out there and teach English, especially as a native English speaker. But I just find it so boring. It's so boring to teach something that you're not interested in. I just speak English. Like, it's like teaching someone to walk. But some people do it. You know, you make money here. So, yeah, as I was talking about earlier, once I was living in LA and New York, I went back to Iowa and I was the news director for a radio station there for 6 months. And at first it was just like awesome. Like, I was the boss. I was doing whatever I wanted. Like, I was just interviewing like city council people and stuff like that. So, like, you know, AAA baseball. But it was like, what a fun time, you know? Like, AAA baseball's a good time, too. And I was enjoying it, but then I got bored again. I hit a wall, and I was like, I can't do this for 5 years. So I started looking for things to go abroad, because I was like, yeah, I'm probably going to be bored anywhere in the United States that I go to. So I looked, and, you know, teaching English abroad, especially, it's kind of pulled back a little bit within the last 3 years. But 3 years ago when I came here, like, Korea, in my mind, without a doubt, from what I'd heard online and talked to people, was like, that was the place to go.
Yeah, you'll be on the plane next week if you sign up for a job.
Absolutely, yeah. No criminal record. Like, give it a couple weeks if you get your documents. It's like awesome lifestyle, especially if you live in Seoul. But even, you know, it takes 4 hours to get like anywhere in Korea.
Right, and they're getting it down to 2 hours.
Yeah, it's going to be ridiculous here in a bit. And so, like, awesome lifestyle pretty much anywhere you live. It's like clean, modern, excellent food, like sympathetic, if you will, to like Westerners, in that like we're not like targeted for like our lifestyle. Like, you know, Western lifestyle is very, very easy to find here in every way. And then also Korean people like are not, you know, some places, you know, some people are like, oh, you're an American. I don't think I've ever had, not that there's not a reason to, I don't think I've ever had a Korean person call me out specifically as an American for like something that my grandfather might have done.
Yeah, they don't, I mean, even though there is a sense of Koreans, like, they feel like they're representatives of their own country, and that in some sense they are responsible for what their grandfather did, they don't turn that around on you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They definitely feel the if you will, the splash of their culture, you know, like skip a rock in the pond and you get that ripple. They feel that, but they don't force that upon us. Yeah, that's great. I've never thought of that. So yeah, I came to Korea, and when I got here, I was teaching English. Not the most exciting thing, but it was okay because I was excited, just like, okay, once again, talking to the British guy, like just having him say hello to me, just walking around Seoul and being like, wow, like, what's that smell? Like, whoa, look at those cool kids with weird haircuts. Or like, whoa, that K-pop, I'm not a huge fan of it, but it's different. It's like amazing, it's different. And that was cool. So I wasn't enjoying my job, but, you know, I was enjoying my life, and it was good.
Everything else was good.
So I played drums. I've played drums since I was like 10. And, growing up in Iowa, not a lot to be said about small town activities when it comes to trying to kill boredom, but I gotta tell you, my school had a hell of a jazz program. Mr. Hagan, if you ever hear this, thank you. That was our band director, and I was such a douchebag to that guy, and he just, he put up with it, and then, we ended up winning state jazz when I was a senior, and I was a drummer. And so, I started playing in bands here, and as I mentioned, my friend Dan, who I did the podcast with 3 years ago, if you come here, you have a lot of time, and if you can play an instrument and you live in Korea, form 7 bands. And if you can't play an instrument, take a couple months and learn an instrument, and then form 5 bands.
And you do it here in Hongdae, right?
Yeah, that's why I decided to live here. I lived in Nowon-gu when I lived here before, which took an hour to get to Hongdae. It kind of sucked. So when I came back this last summer, I was like, yep, I am going to live in Hongdae.
Yeah, it seems like the Korean music scene literally is Hongdae. Outside of K-pop, everything else is here.
Yeah, if you don't... Actually, I don't know anyone that plays K-pop, but if you did, maybe that's a choice.
You don't play K-pop, you live K-pop.
That's right. It's a lifestyle. That's a decent point. Yeah. Got K-pop written on your knuckles. And then, so Hongdae is the place, And so, I was playing in bands in Hongdae, and that was a lot of fun, but, I was kind of missing the media part, and I was doing the podcast with Dan, but... Okay, for me, maybe I have a bias because I went to Emerson, which I almost felt, we were spoiled when it came to radio at Emerson. We had great facilities. And if anything, why one can play with Emerson, aside from the price tag, do something about that, Emerson. Aside from that, Emerson, the kids were too nice. One of my problems with media in the States is that a lot of people that work in radio, douchebags.
Oh, maybe 100%.
Yeah, not great people. Not well. And once again, I have wonderful friends for life who work in the media. And so when I say most people, I mean most people, but by no means everybody. Uneducated, biased, just downright mean.
Blowhards.
People that are just mean?
Yeah.
It's hard to meet just mean people, but wow, you go to a radio station, you'll find some.
Yeah, it's true. This actually reminds me of one radio job I had. Ironically, the boss of that job gave me this piece of advice. It was golden wisdom that I have never forgotten. He says, people are going to call you when you're on the air. They're going to complain, why are you playing this song? Why'd you take this song off the rotation? What's up with this commercial? What are you doing? He says, that guy just got a bad life. You were the person he could call to find something to bitch about. It's not about you. It's about his bad life. And in radio, I feel like there's a lot of bad lives. And people are taking it out on whoever they can.
And so that was one of the reasons, I didn't like LA or New York particularly, but if the people I had worked with, and once again, I had some people I worked with that were great, so I'm not trying to call anyone out specifically, but there were some bad guys. And if the people I'd worked with had been like the people I work with here in Korea when it comes to radio, I might have been able to put up with New York, and I might have been able to put up with LA, but no, was not in the cards. So when I came here, I wanted to get back into radio, but then I was like, oh, well, there's a reason that I left radio. Yeah. And, I'm in Korea, and I'm working at a private academy, and, how's this going to work out? And then just through one way or the other, I got in contact with someone who put me in touch with Arirang, and I was able to start working with them. Just kind of at first they weren't quite sure how to use me, and then it was a weekly show, I think for an hour or two, and eventually I was just this reoccurring guest host, and they were just kind of shooting the breeze about things that were either at the time, hitting the news, or, it was just it's the springtime, so that means this here in Korea, and we'd give our impressions, and I just enjoyed the hell out of that. And, I am a radio guy. I now own a radio here in Korea, but I used to not own a radio, and I used to qualify as that. I'm a radio guy, and I don't even own a radio, so you don't have to apologize if you say you're not going to listen to my show.
Right.
I'm the biggest radio guy you'll probably ever meet, but at the same time, I'm realistic, and I realize that, radio, as you were mentioning, a lot of these media companies, newspapers are going down, radio's been going down for a long time, but online radio and talk radio specifically with local content in the United States, there's so much room for growth. It's going up while everything else is going down. So that being the case, I was here in Seoul, and I was I'm doing this show, this is great, I like these people, I don't want to burn down the radio station that I go to once a week, but I was teaching English, and and this is my big complaint about Korea. If you're a Westerner, and I don't know about other countries, but if you're American and you don't have a graduate degree, I'd like to get a master's degree, but I haven't gone back to school yet. And if you're not married to a Korean, and if you're not Gyopo, if you're not Korean American, you have almost zero chance of getting a job that's not teaching English.
Right.
If you have a ton of money and you can throw down the money, you can start your own business. And I know people have done that, but I just I don't have, even now, I don't have that ability. And so I fell in love with this country and this land, but it was like, I can't work here. I can't do that. And I don't want to teach English anymore. So coincidentally, I actually had my over-the-phone interview, which probably should have been an in-person interview for the Peace Corps when I flew out of LAX to come to Korea. But then I came here, and the Peace Corps takes about a year to do all that stuff anyway. So while I was teaching here and doing work at Arirang, I got they called me up from AAA baseball, to use that reference again. And they're like, yeah, you want to go to somewhere in Latin America, we won't tell you where, and teach English. Although the Peace Corps, as they often do, they lied to me, and they told me that I would be training teachers and not focused on teaching English, but it was the exact opposite. I just ended up teaching English.
Bait and switch.
Yeah, the bait and the switch. And so I was like, yeah, and I liked Korea, but I still had that travel, wanderlust. And I wanted to go out and do some things. And truthfully, I've said this a few different times on a couple different platforms, I wanted to work with poor people. I lived in Germany, top of the world, Germany, great country. Korea, top of Asia, it's getting up there. I wanted to see what it was like to be around poor areas where people didn't have things, and to see what that felt like, and then also be cut off. I wanted to go somewhere where I didn't have internet,
right,
and just kind of see what that did to me, because Germany really changed me. And I don't think Korea changed me too much, because it was a rather positive experience. And I think a lot of change comes from the negative experiences. And so I was just pretty happy in general living in Korea. And so I went and I did the Peace Corps. And then as soon as I got to Colombia, where I was like, yeah, I think I'd like to go back to Korea.
What was wrong with it immediately? Other than the sort of wastebasket toilet paper?
Yeah, wastebasket toilet paper. So every time I do something brand new, or I go to a different country, as it is, to live. I'm not much of a traveler. I don't like traveling to countries. I like living in them. It's almost like someone slapped me in the face. I go a little numb. I remember getting off the plane in, I think in Frankfurt, and back in 2008. And I just it's like someone had slapped me. I just went numb. I was just whoa, this is different. And I got that in Colombia. But it's just as time wore on, I wasn't training teachers. I was teaching English. The Peace Corps lies to you back and forth.
Why do they do that?
Well, some of them are inadvertent lies, and I do understand the Peace Corps is what it is. And it's a government agency, and they can't bend over backwards for you. I understand that. So sometimes the lies are oh, we were supposed to have you sign this form last month, but we didn't give it to you. So we need to have all 24 of you sign this form and date it from last month. And I'm like, that's illegal. And they're like, yay. I'd be like, whatever. And then I like fighting for things I believe in, and I believe in not doing that. But whatever, small thing, not a big deal. That happened a lot. So those types of things, I understand those things. It's administrative. But then it's just oh, yeah, we told you that you could go ahead and go do this, and that we told you could do this. We know that we told you could do this, but we're just going to go ahead and say that didn't happen.
Oh my God.
And it's not a big enough deal that you're going to quit over the Peace Corps, because I believed in my service. I wanted to finish my service. But it's just, I saw that happen all the time. The Peace Corps office would give us directives, and then we'd be like, but that's not what you said. And no, that's what we said.
Do they have an excuse for the bullshit, or just sort of, it was what it was?
Sometimes they had excuses, their hands were tied, but just the longer we were there, the more we realized, no, your hands are not tied. You're choosing to do this. You have a lot of autonomy that you can choose how to run the Peace Corps of this country from Washington. They don't give you, sometimes they give you direct, this is what you gotta do, but sometimes they don't. And the general attitude of the Peace Corps that I was unimpressed with was that I thought that the Peace Corps would not be like the Army. Coming from a small town, I have quite a few people that join the military.
That's a pretty major choice. Well, maybe I'll go to the Army, maybe I'll work, right?
Yeah. And when they told me all the stuff that they had to deal with, I'm like, oh, that's horrible. And they're like, yeah, it is what it is. There was a problem with my billing, so it took 4 weeks to figure it out, and it was just I had to fill out a form. It took 4 weeks to fill out a form. Yeah, man, it's the military. And they weren't surprised. They were just whatever it is, what it is. Right. I was okay, the military, the people that join the military are different than the people that join the Peace Corps. I'm not going to say better or worse. You draw your own conclusions. But I thought that the Peace Corps would have been different. Same BS. They lose paperwork. like people in the Peace, I don't think I ever got this, but people that were in Colombia with me, they got the wrong vaccinations because the Peace Corps didn't look at their paperwork correctly. And I remember one girl was like, I don't need this vaccination. I've already received it. And she's like, no, you're mistaken. I've looked through your paperwork. And then afterwards she's like, you vaccinated me twice. And they're like, oh, well, you're probably fine.
You're probably fine.
Yeah. And then like they would send us to doctors that were just like dirty. And then I would go and complain and they'd be like, oh, you just want to go to like a really good, clean doctor. And I'm like,
oh, Your Majesty.
yeah, like I want to go to a clean doctor. Like I remember arguing with my Peace Corps, not even doctor at the time. For a while, we didn't even have a doctor. We had a nurse practitioner, which I know is close, but should have had a doctor.
Yes.
And she was like, oh, I'm not going to give you this medicine. I'm like, the doctor wrote me a prescription. She's like, yeah, it's too expensive. You don't need it. And I had to argue with her about how expensive my medicine was. And this was Colombia. The medicine was not that expensive. And I just, every time when it came to money, I was just like, we're not getting paid.
Right.
Like, why are you doing this?
Yes.
And then I had all these problems, and then I ended up actually getting sick, and I had to get medically separated, and my Peace Corps service ended early because I was given a medication that was the wrong medication by the Peace
You
Corps.
probably expected at that point.
Yeah, I was given the wrong medication. I got sick, and I got very, very sick, and it was kind of mysterious, and they didn't know what was going on. And I was taking this medication. I'm like, what's going on? And then I got sent back to America, and then I got sent back to Colombia, and then like some other time later it came back, and they still didn't know what was going on. Come to find out, I went back to America. They looked at me. They did some blood tests. They're like, this is what you have. This was probably not hard to figure out in Colombia if someone had done their job correctly. They put me on medicine. Unfortunately, this is something I have to deal with the rest of my life. It's not something that's probably going to go away, but I've gotten much better. It's just something I have to keep control of, and I figure I'll probably eventually die of it, but I'm hoping I'll eventually die at an older age, because like
normal lifespan.
yeah, if you're 90 and you die of like pancreatic cancer, like whatever, you're 90. Right. So I'm thinking I'll probably eventually die of it, but like I'm fine, like, you know, it's just whatever. And like it's just like all this because the Peace Corps didn't want to spend money on their volunteers. They gave me the wrong medicine, documented wrong medicine. I'm not just like making this up. And it's just like afterwards when I was trying to submit receipts for like medical care and stuff, like the people in Washington would give me the wrong directions, so I would fill stuff out. And once again, this is a government institution, so maybe I should have expected this, but I expected more from the Peace Corps.
Right, yes.
I'm not, like, if you're in the Army and it sucks, like, okay, you're getting paid.
Right.
Like, I wasn't getting paid in the Peace Corps. Like, I lost 2 years of wages, like,
right.
And then I had to pay for a lot of out-of-pocket medical expenses.
Yeah, I got a disease out of it.
I got a disease out of it, so like, Peace Corps, like, get your stuff together, man.
Is your experience unusually bad, or do you talk to other Peace Corps people?
My experience was unusually bad.
But do they all, are Peace Corps people you talk to all kind of like, yeah, you know, it wasn't so great?
Okay, so here's my 2 cents. Someone might call me a liar, but this is what I found to be true. If you serve in the Peace Corps and you meet another Peace Corps volunteer, it's like, it's not the same because it's not, but it's similar. It's like, you like a guy who met that served in Iraq. Yeah. You're like, oh, where did you serve? I'm going to buy you a beer. And immediately, when I talk to other Peace Corps volunteers, sometimes I initiate this because I had a rather poor experience that really affected the rest of my life. But even when I meet people that I don't immediately tell them my story, they're like, what'd you go through? Yeah. What did you deal with?
Yeah. What was your nonsense?
Yeah, and then we start shooting the shit. We're like, oh, that happened to me too. And they're like, oh, actually, the medical care where we were was awesome, but like, just the office staff was just completely incompetent. Like
something sucked.
Yeah. So like, they'll be like, oh, our medical care was great. Like our medical care was too good. Like they're just like, every time we got a cold, they sent us to the doctor. But then something else would be wrong, or you know, like, and I'd just be like, oh yeah. And then sometimes we'd like hit the nail on the head, like it was the same in Colombia as it was where you were. That is the Peace Corps story. If you meet someone and you're not a Peace Corps volunteer, the first thing they're going to tell you is that, like, I believed in my service, it was great, like, I made a difference, so you should join the Peace Corps. Probably a lot of time. Yeah. But if you really get a Peace Corps volunteer to open up to you, and if you're a Peace Corps volunteer and you talk to another Peace Corps volunteer, they're going to tell you some sad stories. They might know some people who really got taken advantage of, like I felt like I got taken advantage of. And then you're going to meet people who are like, you know, something really bad happened, and it wasn't the fact that the staff did anything wrong. Peace Corps is not easy. Bad things happen. If I would have got hit by a car, it would be a different story. So that happens. You know, people get raped, people get murdered. And sometimes it was unavoidable. And sometimes, like the case of a Peace Corps volunteer in an African country, she sent an email. Hopefully I'm not getting any of these details wrong, but if I do, I apologize. I believe she sent an email to like the Peace Corps headquarters in the country being like, this person that I work with at this school type of group, I think he's like molesting the children. And then don't tell this relative or this person that knows him who also works in the office. Don't tell them that. Somehow, I'll let you draw your own conclusions. The person in the office found out about that. Within like a couple of days to a week or two, this volunteer was murdered.
Yikes.
Outside of her house. She was sleeping outside because it was really warm and someone slit her throat. I'm going to go ahead and say the Peace Corps didn't handle that well.
Right, there's a chance of that, certainly.
And there's just so many, like, volunteers being blamed for rape. Like, well, what were you doing? Like, were you out late at night? And I'll admit, there are bad choices you can make with any situation, but, like, blaming rape victims, that's a little iffy.
Right.
So, that being the case, Peace Corps has a lot of problems, and I'm not trying to shut it down or do anything like that, but I do not recommend Peace Corps service to someone. And if you decide you want to do Peace Corps service, that's great. Make sure that they're treating you well. And if they don't treat you well, just quit. Just go home. Don't take their crap. Because I got worse and worse and worse because I believed in what I was doing. I was working my butt off. I was the busiest person that I knew. And eventually I just got so sick I had to stop doing all my extra activities. And all the great things I was doing just ended. I had a radio show in Colombia. I had a bilingual radio show. It's called Inglés al Límite. English to the limit. And all that died when I left. No one took that over. No one was going to take over the English show for me. And so, yeah, long story short, don't recommend the Peace Corps, but if you believe in it and if you want to do it, go ahead. Make a difference. Don't put up with crap like I did. There are other organizations that you can be a part of. There are other things that you can do that are not the Peace Corps if you so choose. And then other times you might be in the Peace Corps and it might be the best decision you ever made. It's literally, what's that, Russian roulette, where there's like one bullet in the chamber?
Yeah, you spin the chamber, and that's the Peace Corps.
Yeah, but like the other bullets are not empty. The other bullets are filled with like awesomeness.
Yeah,
so if you get like an awesome bullet, then maybe you'll get an actual bullet.
Yes. But this whole time in the Peace Corps, were you thinking of returning to, like, if only I could return to Seoul, I want to go back to Seoul? Was that the thought?
After a certain amount of time, absolutely. When I first got there, there was another volunteer who had lived in Korea. There were actually two volunteers who lived in Korea. And I had probably had the best experience out of the two of them. One guy just didn't like it at all, and I stopped arguing with him. I was like, "You didn't like this? You didn't think this was good?" And he's like, "No, man. Like I didn't like Korea." I'm like, "Okay." And this other girl, who became a good friend of mine, she lived rurally, and her complaints were living rurally. She liked Korea, she liked everything about it, but she's like, I lived in a small town.
She'd have said the same thing in Iowa.
Yeah, no, absolutely. She had a lot of the same complaints that I did. Minus that she had delicious food.
Yes, that's one. No Korean restaurants in your town?
They're in Des Moines, in the Skywalk, which is like bridges in the air that connect the skyscrapers with the Des Moines skyscrapers.
Sure. I mean, we have those connectors in downtown Los Angeles as well. They were a popular thing in the 70s.
Yeah, they were popular. I think they were really popular back in the 90s. Now they're starting to become popular again. There's a Korean restaurant. It's not a Korean restaurant. It's Chinese and Korean food. But yes. I was back in Des Moines before I came to Korea this summer, and they were real Korean people. And I spoke some Korean with them, and they were so excited to have me, and I was so excited to talk to them. Oh, it was great. So when I was in Colombia, I was like, I'm from Korea. Or, I was in Korea before I came. I came from Korea, and now I'm excited to be in Colombia. But then as time went on, and like as I wasn't doing what I thought I was going to be doing, and as I was getting sicker and sicker, and as the Peace Corps was just like not listening to anything I had to say. And I was like, you know what? If I don't die, because there was really I got really sick. Right. There was a time I thought I was going to die. I was like, I'm going to go back to Korea, and
if I live, I'll do this. That was what it came down to.
Yeah. And that's had I had a great Peace Corps experience, I don't know if I would have came back to Korea. Because like I probably would have gone on to another country. I had this whole idea of continuing to serve in the Peace Corps. They've Peace Corps response for like 1 year or like one-ish, less or more a year, and it's for people that have already done Peace Corps service. At least it used to be. Now anyone can do Peace Corps response. They've kind of opened it up. It used to be you had to be an RPCV, which is Returned Peace Corps Volunteer. You had to have that status to do response. And they're just like, once you've done Peace Corps, they're like, you're a solid guy. You've already made it through, solid guy or girl. And we're going to send you over here. We're going to send you over there. And I had like all these dreams about like going to Africa and working with like a radio station or something. And
Always radio.
always radio. Yeah, and I wanted to do radio. I tried telling them, I was like, send me to Africa. I know that they have all these like small rural radio stations, but unfortunately another problem with the Peace Corps is they don't always sometimes they do a great job with this. Sometimes it's great, but like with me, sometimes it's not a great job. They'll be like, yeah, you go to Colombia. Yeah, you go over here. I would have loved to have been able to do something with the skills that I had. But, I taught English in Korea, so fair enough. They wanted me to teach English in Colombia.
Right.
And so when I was in Colombia, as I was getting sick, and, I wanted, and because I'd worked at Arirang, I'd done that show, I was like, if I could go back and somehow, get a full-time job working for a Korean radio station in English and, like, go back to school or, like, study Korean, like, I just think I'd be so happy. And so when I went back to the States, and not when I recovered, I was still a little sick, but once I got to the point where, like, I was solid enough to, like, leave.
Good enough, I'm out.
I came straight back to Korea, and that was a little less than a year ago. Yeah.
And here we are, we're in Seoul, you're working in the English language media here. It's a surprisingly robust scene, English language media, especially in Seoul. You contributed to TBS EFM, you do Groove Magazine's podcast, you're doing interviews, which is a very similar project to what I'm doing here on this season of this show, interviews. I'm doing about 50 interviews with people in Korea. What do you try to accomplish being sort of an English language voice here in Seoul?
Sure. Well, first off, I really respect what you're doing, because I started doing what you're doing now, and then I was just like, that's a lot of work. So when I first came back
Takes a lot of time, and you need a sort of obsessiveness, I guess.
No, absolutely. It's and it's just, I find it, even though I enjoy it, it's very hard to feel that it's rewarding for me, because it's just like, I'm so, as I said, I was spoiled at Emerson. Like, I wish people had been kind of douchebags, because then it would have prepared me for the rest of the world, but everybody was so nice. Right. We had a radio station, so I feel like I was part of a real radio station. So for me, it's, even though it's getting to be more and more the same thing, but I want to do radio in a booth.
Yes.
I want to have a microphone. I want there to be some soundproofing on the wall.
You want a clock counting down.
Yeah, I want there to be the red on-air light. I want there to be a big board that's way too complicated for what we use it for.
Every producer looking through the glass.
Yeah, and so I want that.
Which is possible here. We should underscore. It's more possible here in a way than it is in English language media in America.
Depending where you are, absolutely. If I was in New York, yeah. For the type of radio that I want to do, I don't want to do like all the hits radio. I want to do talk radio, and that's not a young man's game. So I came back here and I started a website called Soul It Up, so like SEOUL itup.com, and I interviewed a couple people before I left, and then when I got here, I started interviewing bands and people, blah 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 blah. And it was cool, and I got some listeners, and it was fun. I was getting emails and things, but it's just like, my heart wasn't in it, because like I got to be connected to things. Right. So I kind of stopped doing Soul It Up like full force, maybe sometime like around winter of last year. I was still doing it from time to time, and I did some interviews that, like, because they weren't like native English speakers, you just have to spend like hours editing that together, making sure it all flows. And I was just like, I got some interviews in the can I can put up if I want to. And I started focusing more on music. But what was really lucky is that when I came back in the summer, like immediately I got hooked up with TBS EFM, and I was able to start doing reporting for them once a week for This Morning, a show with Alex Jensen. And I was doing that once a week, and I wanted to do more, but I was doing it once a week, and so I was doing that, and I was doing Soul It Up. And I was playing in bands, and I was taking Korean language classes at a university here. As I mentioned, I've completed the second level, but I still can't read the sign in the bathroom that says, "Don't throw your toilet paper in the toilet."
You could read it if you wanted to. You just don't really notice.
Yeah. Which I don't understand. The toilets here have lots of power. In Colombia, the problem was that the plumbing, and they couldn't process all the toilet paper. Is that really a problem here in Korea?
People are used to not doing it, I think, in an older generation.
I'm just so surprised. Everything's so modern here.
Yes, everything's strikingly modern, and some things are surprising.
Yeah. And it really is the old meets the new, and that's probably what it is. Anyone that's been to Korea, it's the old meets the new. More new every day. The old's dying out, which makes sense. But like, I would love for a little bit of that.
Sometimes they go too far.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I would. Another topic we can talk about once we get off this immediate point, but I really wish they can preserve as much as they can here at Seoul, because that's really what makes it special.
Especially the pojangmatcha, the tent restaurants that go up in the night. I expected to find more of those, but then I heard they were going away. Then I'm like, and then I was glad to find the ones I did, because in a way it seems like Korea, and this is a point I hammer on a lot, embarrassed of kind of the wrong things in their past. You know what I mean?
Maybe because I love everything Korea. I want these women selling dokboki and tweakum and stuff like that on the street, and like the ramen tents.
They won't go away for a long time.
No, but like they need more. Like they just they're having like riots and like boycotts because they're trying to clean up all the street vendors, because like technically they're all illegal, they're not licensed. Which I understand, like health wise, maybe they should be licensed, but like people like flipping carts and like old women are like crying because like all their food spilled, and like that's what makes this place cool, man. Like stuff like that. Like I want more of that, but. So that's why I came back. So I was, working at TBS EFM this one day a week, and I was doing the Sold Up podcast, and I did some photography and stuff like that. Heart wasn't in it though, and I was learning Korean, and I was playing in a lot of bands, doing a lot of music. And so that ended, and then in the spring I pitched the Groovecast to Groove. They didn't have a podcast. And it's a magazine, so it's not, it's not top of mind, let's have a podcast. But I thought it would be something that would be worth it, and it would be something that I thought would be easy, and it's something that I'd be good at doing, and I could do it all my own equipment, and so I do that. Every month I put out somewhere between 3 or 4 episodes that are always attached to something that's in the coinciding issue of the month. And so I know you're going to speak with Robert Kohler of the Marmot's Hole, who's like been here 17 years. I interviewed him with also TBS EFM, but then I interviewed him for the Groovecast because he was our front page guy like last month, because he works in the media. He has the Marmot's Hole blog. He's also lived here 17 years. He wears hanbok, which is the traditional Korean clothes every day, which he's not a thin man, and so he's a taller white guy walking around in hanbok, like noticeable. So like that's cool. He's got his little idiosyncrasies
as expats have.
Yeah, you got it. Anytime and especially if you become famous ever, you got to be weird.
Yes.
Not weird famous people are not interesting. You got to have some weirdness going on.
You're already kind of weird as a foreigner here to the Koreans, but you got to pile one more thing on.
You got to do something. I can't wear hanbok because that's what he's doing. So I gotta get some nice socks or something. I'm doing the Groovecast and I really enjoy that. But once again, that's just a part-time thing, and then TBS EFM is part-time, and I decided to take a break from the university. I found that once again I'm not great with languages, but I found that just as a foreigner, as an American, it seemed it was harder for me than it was for like the Japanese girls in my class, or like the 19 Chinese girls that were in my class.
They know, it's like knowing a Latin-derived language. Yeah. They know something of the origins of everything.
And there's so much Chinese and Korean. And it's just like, it was really hard for me. So, but no, I was proud. I passed my last class. I passed level 2, just barely, but I passed. Right. And so now I'm really, I love working at TBS EFM, but, as is the case here, unfortunately, when it comes to English media, they don't hire based, I don't know if I want to say merit or if I want to say talent, but they don't hire the way they would in America. Where in America, if you're a radio station, maybe you wouldn't hire the guy who is best for the job or the most talented, but you would hire the guy who would do the best job in what you're looking for, because you're trying to make a profit. So you're going to hire the guy who's the best at the job, or the guy who's going to get the most ratings, depending on what the job is, Here in Korea, I found that they want people to succeed. I mean, it'd be stupid to hire someone who's not going to do a good job. Yeah. And Korean people are not stupid. Korean people are smarter than I'll ever be. Your average guy you pick off the street, they study so hard here. Right. But they're hiring people that are gilpo, like Korean American. Either they were born in America, and so they have like an F-series visa to come back here because, they're ancestrally, if you will, Korean, or, they're born in Korea and then they went over there for school, or they went over with their parents, and so they have dual citizenship. Or they're hiring people that, maybe one day I'll marry a Korean, and, my wife, I'll have an awesome visa because of my wife.
But you want to avoid marrying for a visa.
Yeah, I don't, not only do I not want to marry for a visa, but like, I'm not so keen on like just getting married, because like, I'm young and like I've been traveling a lot and stuff, and like I don't want to have kids, and so like, who wants to get married just for a visa? But like marriage in general is not so appealing to me. So, like, that's not really an option, but, like, I love this country. Like, I want to be here. And so, like, the only other options, unless I'm completely wrong, and, you know, a lot of the times I don't know what's going on here because as a foreigner, for me, sometimes it's hard. So if I'm wrong, please send me a message and let me know. But as an American, from what I can tell, unless you have a master's degree, if you have a master's degree, it's easier, especially if you have a master's degree from a Korean university. It's easier to get a normal job, a real job, not teaching English. If you marry a Korean, as I mentioned, if you have a certain amount of capital and you can just start a business, then I know plenty of people that have done that. And maybe I'm lazy, maybe I should just start a business, but I love radio so much. Like, I just want to do radio. And so, of the media entities that exist here in Korea, there are a lot of foreigners that work there, but there are more Korean American or more people that are married to Koreans that work there.
Slants toward the sort of pre-visa.
Yeah, and so I probably, on my left hand, I can count of the people I know personally who have their own full-time work visa from a Korean company, media organization, for the media job that they do. And that is a small amount compared to the amount of foreigners who are doing the media here. And so that's frustrating. As someone who just, like, loves this country and has sort of, like, you know, put my country on the back burner for who knows how long, and just wanted to live here, like, you know, I went to college, like, I got good grades, like, I don't have a criminal record, like, I've done lots of work in Korea, like, people are always like, oh, where are you working now, Chance? Because, like, you know, I just, like, do all this stuff because, like, I'm a busy person. I like to stay busy. But also I'm trying to, like, you know, like, well, if I do the Groovecast, maybe at some point, you know, someone would be like, oh, I heard you on the Groovecast. Maybe we could have you be on the air here. And it's just, like, I hope that eventually it works out. But, like, it's a hard road.
Right.
It's a hard road to travel. And it's just so unfortunate because, once again, without calling anybody out, because I have a great friend who came here to Korea. I met him in Colombia. We were Peace Corps volunteers, and all I did was talk about how I was going back to Korea.
Right.
And I got him to come back here. And he's like a real teacher, and he teaches here. And he teaches English, but, like, I consider him to be a real educator, where I was just a guy teaching English. And he loves it here, just having a good time. We play a lot of music together. It's good he's here. He's a good, solid guy. But if you are running a country and the vast majority of people that you bring into your country are either military or people who are teaching English, who are not people who necessarily studied English, or people who are actually, like, qualified to teach English in the United States, but just native English speakers who passed, you know, a criminal background check.
Sure, they're not criminals.
They're not criminals, passed a criminal background check, and went to a college, and I assume had to do well enough to be hired by your company. If those are the two big groups of people coming in here, maybe you got to diversify a little bit.
Maybe.
Yeah, like, you know, we think of diversity as, like, gender, race, religion, creed, but, like, job type.
Yeah, occupational diversity.
Occupational diversity. I think that would really benefit Korea, because if you had occupational diversity, I feel like there would be more of these working Korean relationships, where now, you know, for my money, there was nothing wrong with where I worked before. I had a few problems with it, but generally I think it was okay. You know, we didn't really hang out with the Korean teachers that worked there. It was like foreigners hung out with foreigners and Koreans hung out with Koreans, and I think that's the norm. But, like, if you work for a company, if you work for, like, Samsung, or if you work for, like, a radio station, you're gonna hang out with those other people, and I really think it would just be mutually beneficial for everybody involved. So, you know, if I could rock the Blue House,
Yes.
you know, the Korean White House, and just be like, change a few things, let people who are obviously interested in trying to live here, and I'm not trying to change Korea, like, I don't necessarily feel like I have any place in politics here, whereas if I lived in Germany, I would try to actively participate in politics. I think it's a long time before I know enough about Korea to be able to say one way or the other what they should do, and I feel that living here, not because people tell me, but because I just feel that. But that being said, make it a little easier for someone to come here and live if they love Korea, and, like, they've lived in Korea and they can speak a little bit of Korean.
Yeah, something to contribute.
Yeah, and I know that there's, like, a point system if you, like, lived here for, like, 4 or 5 years and you score a certain level on the TOEIC Korean test, and if you, like, 10 classes and things like that. So far I've gotten about 1 year down straight, and so that's a couple years off, you know, and it'd be nice if there was something else I could look forward to. Yeah, because I just love it here. Like, I mean, I don't know specifically about, you live in Koreatown, but, like, I mean, you've probably had lots of experiences with different countries and people, but like for me, Korea is it. Like I love Germany. Germany's a great place, but I chose Korea, and I still believe in that decision.
Words of wisdom for the Blue House from my guest today, Chance Dorland. He is the creator of, well, Chance and Dan Do Korea, Chance Dorland's Peace Corps podcast, but more currently the Groovecast, and he's also a contributor on TBS EFM. Chance, thanks so much.
You're welcome. I'm so glad you're here doing this. I really enjoyed speaking with you. Got a good head on your shoulders.
Thank you. This has been Notebook on Cities and Culture. I've been Colin Marshall. You can keep up with the cultural creators, internationalists, and observers of the urban scene on the show at colinmarshall.org. Thanks. And special thanks to all the backers of Notebook on Cities and Culture's Korea tour on Kickstarter. Adam Hartzell, Aidan Nullman, Alfred Lee, Andy Cooney, Angus Gordon, Bala Chinupati, Cam Smith, Chin Music Press, Dan Caraselli, Danny, Deborah Smith, Emmett Farragher, Umberto Grant, Ian Plosker, Ismail Kennedy, Jackie Gast, Jay Chang, Jeffrey Davis, James DeVito, Jonathan Filbert, Josh Paget, Kimberly Hahn, Manvir, Mark Hines, Matthew Workman, Maureen Kincaid Speller, Monica Eck, Michael Fransky, MJ Pritchett, Patrick O'Flaherty, Patrick Park, Piers Rippey, Robert Salzberg, Samuel Hansen, Sean Brown, Themistocles Crucis, Thomas Unterberger, Timothy Dobbs, and Wayne Wright.